In the spring of 1207, in a dusty Anatolian town, a jurist named Hakim Nizam stood over a stone cistern. He wasn't peering for water. He was staring into himself, as if the darkness might finally answer. That afternoon, a travel-worn dervish, Azar of the Salt Roads, had stopped him in the courtyard and asked a question with the softness of silk and the force of a blade. Who stands closer to the real? The messenger who says, "I cannot encompass you," or the intoxicated saint who cries, "Glory to me"? Nizam reached for doctrine, for commentary, for the tidy ladders of the mind. He said, "Of course, the messenger." Azar nodded, then tilted the mirror. Then why does the holiest voice confess not knowing, while the drunken one speaks like a son? In that pause, something in Nizam cracked, the way a sealed vessel breaks when heat reaches its hidden air. The Masnavi calls this the moment the veil admits it is a veil. He had no answer. Not because the question was unfair, because it was too accurate. Nizam felt what scholars fear most, the sudden discovery that knowledge can be a curtain. He had spent years reading about the ocean and had never tasted salt. Azar didn't argue. He simply looked at him as if listening for a deeper voice inside the man's ribs. "You've trained your mind to count," the dervish said, "but not your seeing." In Attar's conference of the birds, the travelers cross 7 valleys, and every valley steals a certainty. The first theft is comfort, the loss of being sure. Nizam stood in that first valley now, still in the city, still in daylight, yet inwardly exiled. Because there is an organ older than thought. Sufis named it the Qalb, not the meat heart, but a subtle center that turns, flips, changes direction like a compass near a hidden magnet. When it sleeps, you live in fragments. When it wakes, your life begins to arrange itself around a center you forgot existed. And you, modern, distracted, oversupplied, feel the symptom as emptiness, not boredom, hunger. That hunger is not cured by more noise, not by another purchase, another screen, another relationship used like anesthesia. It's cured the way rust is cured, by friction, by heat, by ruthless attention. In memories, dreams, reflections, Jung admits that modern man has learned to navigate the outer world while becoming a stranger to the inner one. We can map galaxies, yet we misread a single dream. We can optimize habits, yet cannot name the ache beneath them. The result is a life that functions, but doesn't mean. The Qalb is the meaning maker. The ancients called it many things. The Gnostics, a buried spark. The alchemists, Prima Materia, the raw stuff you avoid because it looks like mud. And St. John of the Cross calls the awakening stage what it feels like. A dark night, when the soul loses the lights it depended on, so a deeper vision can form. Tonight, we descend into that inner anatomy, not as theology, not as self-help, but as occult mechanics. The hidden laws by which the heart becomes a mirror. Close the door, lower the lights. Let the old world go quiet enough for the new one to speak. To understand the spiritual heart, you must abandon the modern fantasy that you are one simple thing. The mystics never saw the human being as a single unit. They saw a cosmos, layers of perception stacked like worlds. In Sufi psychology, there is the nafs, the grasping self that says mine, that panics at loss, that survives by appetite. There is the analyzing intellect, brilliant and useful, but dry as sand. And then there is the Qalb, a subtle organ that does not think reality, but tastes it. The nafs wants comfort. The aql wants explanations. The Qalb wants the real. Here is the trap. The intellect can describe fire with perfect accuracy and still freeze to death. It can catalog the names of God and never meet him. Rumi warns, again and again, that words are boats, meant to cross water, not to become your home. So when Azar shattered Nizam's certainty, he wasn't humiliating him. He was relocating him from the palace of concepts to the doorway of experience. And the doorway is inside the chest. The Sufis say the Qalb lives in Barzakh, the imaginal realm between matter and spirit. Not imaginary like fantasy, but imaginal like symbol. The place dreams are made. The place meaning takes form before it becomes thought. When the Qalb is clean, it becomes a mirror. And in that mirror, the real appears. Not as an object, out there, but as a presence that dissolves separation. This is why mystics speak in paradox. They're describing a sight that happens when the one who sees and the thing seen begin to overlap. But for most people, the mirror is rusted. The rust has a name: ghafla, heedlessness, forgetting, the soft trance of distraction. Every time you scroll without hunger, every time you betray your deeper knowing for approval, every time you numb the ache instead of listening to it, another thin film coats the mirror. Jung would call this a life unrelated to the unconscious, cut off from the inner source that generates symbols, direction, and moral energy. You're not lacking information. You were lacking contact. So the question becomes practical. How do you polish the mirror without cracking it? How do you wake the organ that sees? Rumi tells a story, though I'll give it to you with different clothes. A copper worker named Farid dreamed, 3 nights in a row, that a treasure was buried under a collapsed arch in a far city. The dream was so bright, it left a taste in his mouth. So he sold his tools, kissed his mother's hands, and walked for weeks until the horizon changed accents. He found the arch exactly as in the dream. He began to dig. Guards seized him. They beat him, called him a thief, dragged him before their captain. Farid begged for mercy and told the whole truth. A dream sent me. The captain laughed like a man who has never been hungry. Dreams? I've had one too, he said, amused. I keep seeing a treasure beneath a fig tree in a courtyard in your town, next to a cracked fountain and a blue door. But I'm not a fool. I don't chase dreams. Farid went cold. Because the captain had just described his own home. The treasure wasn't across deserts. It was under the ruins of what he lived inside every day. Ignored, stepped over, forgotten. This is the Qalb. You travel outward until suffering forces you back inward with new eyes. Here's the paradox. You cannot find it by staying comfortable. You must leave, psychologically, spiritually, so the old map can fail. Jung calls this the circumambulation of the self. The psyche circles the center like pilgrims around a Kaaba. It spirals outward into conflicts, relationships, obsessions, losses, until the ego, exhausted, finally admits it is not the king. Alchemy says the same thing with different symbols. The work begins with nigredo, blackening, a descent into confusion, rot, and dissolution. The old identity decomposes. The good person mask cracks. The compulsions show their teeth. You meet what you've denied. This is why St. John of the Cross describes the dark night as a mercy that feels like abandonment. The lights go out, so you stop worshiping the light bulbs. And this is why the Sufis speak of fana, annihilation, not self-hatred, not violence. A controlled burning. The false self is reduced to ash, so the deeper heart has space to breathe. God, they say, does not enter a house already full, so emptiness is not the enemy. It is the invitation. But what does polishing the mirror mean in daily life, beyond poetry? In the Sufi sciences, there are disciplines designed to break the tyranny of the nafs and the addiction of the intellect, not to destroy them, just to dethrone them. First, Deker, remembrance. It isn't relaxation. It is friction. A repetition so steady the mind cannot keep performing. The name becomes rhythm. The rhythm becomes presence. At first, you recite. Then you are recited. The nafs gets bored. The akal runs out of commentary. And in the gap, the heart begins to hear. Second, subha, companionship with someone awake enough to disturb you. Not a perfect guru. A mirror, a witness. Someone who can catch your evasions in real time. Nizam needed Azar because the ego is always clever in private. Alone, we call our chains preferences. Jung would name this dynamic transference. The psyche projects the inner guide onto another, and through that tension, something buried becomes visible. Awakening is rarely comfortable. It is usually relational. Third, muhasabah, self-accounting. At night, before sleep, you replay the day like an alchemist reviewing a batch. Where did I lie to protect my image? Where did I reach for a bad habit to avoid a feeling? Where did I say yes while my chest said no? This is moral panic. It's precision. Al-Ghazali, in The Alchemy of Happiness, treats the soul like a craft. If you do not inspect the work, you cannot improve it. The point is not shame. The point is to stop living unconsciously. Because bad habits are rarely about pleasure. They're about avoidance. The habit is a spell that keeps you from meeting the moment where the heart wants to speak. Fourth, Qalb, solitude. Not isolation as ideology, but temporary withdrawal to hear what the noise covers. Modern life is engineered to prevent silence, because silence reveals the real ruler, the restless self. In solitude, the persona collapses. The masks lose their audience. And what remains is raw material. Prima Materia, your anxiety, grief, envy, longing. The very stuff the alchemists say must be cooked. If you can sit with it without fleeing, the mirror starts to shine. Now we reach a dangerous secret. The heart often wakes through the beloved. In Sufi poetry, the beloved looks like a person, radiant, elusive, intoxicating. But the poets insist it is more than romance. It is the soul's own missing half calling itself home. Jung names a similar figure, the anim, the inner image that carries feeling, meaning, and the bridge to the unconscious. When this image is projected outward, you become obsessed. You call it love, destiny, chemistry. Sometimes it is, but psychologically, it is also an invitation. Recover what you've exiled. This is why Nizam, after meeting Azar, began speaking in language that sounded scandalously intimate. Moon, wine, wound, union. The meeting was not merely social. It was initiatory. And when the beloved vanishes, through betrayal, distance, death, or simple disappointment, most people collapse. Mystics do something else. They withdraw the projection. They bring the treasure back inside. The longing remains, but it changes direction. It stops begging the world to complete it. It begins to dig. This is the mechanism behind so many compulsions. You project your own soul onto objects, food, pornography, power, productivity, spiritual content, lovers, ideologies. Anything can become a substitute altar. The naf says, if I get this, I'll be whole. And the world, finite decaying, always fails the promise. Then the craving returns, sharper. The mystics call this idolatry, but not in the childish sense of statues, in the surgical sense, giving ultimate value to what cannot carry it. So the work is not stop the habit as a moral command. The work is return the stolen divinity to its source. This is why the awakened heart does not become cold or withdrawn. It becomes frighteningly loving, because it no longer needs people as narcotics. It can meet them as mirrors. Atar's birds only find their king when they realize the king is not separate. Simurg is the reflection of their own gathered reality. The divine is not a trophy at the end. It is the seeing that was missing. But do not romanticize this. When the projection returns inward, the ego panics. It feels like losing everything, because it is. And this is where the dark night truly begins. Saint John of the Cross describes the dark night as an inner stripping. Prayer tastes like dust, meaning collapses. The soul feels abandoned. Sufis recognize the same terrain. They say, when the heart is about to open, the nafs throws smoke. In this stage, you will think you are regressing. You will feel worse. Old cravings flare. Old memories rise. The mind says, see, this is pointless. But alchemy warns, putrefaction looks like failure to the untrained eye. Han calls it the confrontation with the shadow. Everything you rejected to remain acceptable. Rage, envy, lust, cowardice, and also your strength, your eros, your creative fire. The ego fears the shadow because it fears loss of control. So the heart is tested, not by temptation alone, but by meaninglessness. Can you endure a week without your usual anesthetic? Can you sit in the discomfort long enough for the real message to emerge? Because the dark night is not punishment. It is detox from illusion. When the false self finally whispers, I cannot do this alone, something deeper stirs. The house empties. The guest arrives. So what does the Qalb actually do when it awakens? It knows by participation. The intellect knows by distance. It separates, labels, dissects. Useful, necessary, even sacred in its own domain. But it cannot cross the final gap. The heart knows like fire knows dry wood. Like music knows the body. It doesn't merely observe love, it becomes love. It doesn't analyze the divine. It experiences presence directly, without the middleman of language. This is what the old traditions call Gnosis, not belief, not argument, but immediate knowing. When mystics say, I saw God, they do not mean a figure on a throne. They mean the veil of separation dissolved and the seer and the seen overlapped. Plotinus said the mind can approach the one, circle it, but cannot seize it. Only union can know it. And union is the mode of the heart. Alchemy encodes the same truth. Lead becomes gold, not by being lectured into gold, but by undergoing transformation, heat, pressure, dissolution, recombination. Your bad habits are laid, not because they are sinful, but because they are heavy, repetitive, unconscious. The heart is gold, awake, responsive, luminous. And the philosopher's stone? It's not an object. It's the capacity to perceive the sacred in the ordinary. But awakening is not the end. If it were, mysticism would be escapism. The Sufis speak of baqa, subsistence. After annihilation you return. After the night, you re-enter the marketplace with different eyes. The alchemists call this rubedo, reddening. The integration of gold into life, blood, action. This is where the occult becomes practical. When the Qalb is awake, you notice urges earlier, at the seed stage. You can watch the impulse form, the story attach, the hand reach for the phone, the drink, the dopamine. And because you are present, you have a choice. You stop treating yourself as a machine that should behave and start treating yourself as a ritual space that must be kept clean. Nizam, after Azar's question broke him open, did not flee society. He began teaching, feeding the poor, listening to strangers with a tenderness that seemed excessive. His students said he had become soft. He had. The heart is soft because it is alive, and that softness is not weakness. It is precision without cruelty. This is the test. Can you carry the awakened heart into ordinary hours, emails, traffic, temptation, boredom, without losing it? Here, at the threshold, the teaching becomes a question aimed directly at you. If the heart is a mirror, then your life is the cloth. Every habit either polishes or smears. Every day you either remember or forget again. Rumi says the beloved is closer than breath. Al-Ghazali says the true craft is the purification of the inner instrument. Jung says the self is not only the center, but the whole circumference, always present, always pressuring you toward wholeness. So the issue is not whether the organ exists. It's whether you will stop feeding the rust. Will you trade 1 hour of numbness for 1 hour of silence? Will you examine your day like an alchemist, not to condemn, but to refine? Will you endure the dark night without rushing to replace it with glittering distractions? The treasure is under the familiar ground, beneath the patterns you repeat until you forget you repeating them. Dig there, and when the Qalb opens, like a rose in black soil, you will understand why the intoxicated saint could cry, "Glory," and why the messenger could confess, "I do not know." One was speaking from the ego, the other from the infinite. The heart is calling, not tomorrow, now.